This is Living One. My name is Olivia Crossman, and I am your host. Living One is a monthly webinar series in which presenters from around the world share their vision for a future where all Earth beings live as one community in peace, dignity, and freedom. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? This last fall marked the beginning of Living One's 4th year, but today these conversations are more important than ever, for they are more than conversations. They are opportunities to build community, salve for the isolating wounds of our time. Today, we have the 6th and final session of our spring series, Earth Restoration and the Evolution of Human Consciousness. This series explored the widespread calls to restore nature, who has suffered so egregiously over the past 500 years from colonizing, human appropriation, destruction, and overpopulation. In light of recognition by many indigenous humans and Western science of animal and earth sentience, nature's restoration takes on a broader and a deeper meaning. Today, we will wrap up this series in conversation with 2 individuals who have dedicated their lives to earth restoration and expanding human consciousness. Thank you for joining us over these last 6 weeks as we explored this important topic together. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulos Center for Nonviolence, located in southern Oregon, is also the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, daku-betite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. To recognize the land is to recognize the lasting effects of colonization, genocide, and oppression that still impact indigenous communities today, but it is also an expression of gratitude and appreciation for the land and for all those whose homelands we live and work on. In the last of this 6-part series, we welcome Dr. Mary Graham and Dr. Freya Mathews. Mary is a professor at the University of Queensland, Australia. Mary is a Kambumeri person through her father's heritage and affiliated with Waka Waka through her mother's people. Mary has worked across several government agencies, community organizations, and universities, including the Department of Community Services, Aboriginal and Islander Child Care Agency, the University of Queensland, and the Foundation for Aboriginal and Islander Research Action. Mary has also worked extensively for the Foundation for Aboriginal and Islander Research Action as a native title researcher and was also a regional counselor for the former Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission. Mary has been a lecturer with the University of Queensland teaching Aboriginal history, politics, and comparative philosophy. She has also lectured nationally on these subjects and developed and implemented into university curricula Aboriginal perspectives, Aboriginal approaches to knowledge, and at the post-graduation level, Aboriginal politics. Freya Mathews is an ecophilosopher, author, and Emeritus Professor of Environmental Philosophy at Latrobe University in Australia. She has published over 100 books, articles, and essays on ecological philosophy, including The Ecological Self. Her latest book is The Dao of Civilization, A Letter to China. In addition to writing, she co-manages a 350-acre private conservation estate in northern Victoria. She is a fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. Before we begin, let me share a few logistical notes. Freya and Mary will be speaking for about 45 minutes, after which we will have 15 minutes for question and answer. In order to proceed in a timely manner, we ask that you please send your questions along in the chat during their conversation, and we will read them out after they have finished. For anyone who isn't familiar with the Zoom chat function, if you move your cursor towards the bottom of your screen, you will see a number of icons appear, one of which is the chat function towards the center left of your screen. If you click on that, the chat will appear where you can type any questions or comments as we go. We have 2 members of our Krulos community here with us today, Jenny and Diksha, who will be monitoring the chat throughout our time together. Also, please note that the Zoom session will be recorded, so if you would feel more comfortable leaving your camera off or changing your Zoom name, please feel free to do so. Finally, we ask that unless you are currently speaking, you do keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. So without further ado, we welcome Mary and Freya.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's lovely to have you both here with us today. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about each of your arcs as it led you to the work you're doing today?
Mary, why don't you start?
Yeah, okay. Would you mind if I introduce myself first?
Absolutely.
Yeah. sorry, we usually do this. I usually do this, and other Aboriginal people will say who we are and where our countries are and all that. We call our ancestral lands countries among each other, you know. So yes, like you said, I was born here in Brisbane, but grew up here on my father's people's land, the Yugambeh language-speaking people, of which the Kombumerri is the actual clan group I belong to. And my mother is from the Waka Waka region, which is about 300 or 400 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, on what you would call a reservation, I suppose. Sherburg, it was called. Yeah, so I have lots of relatives around this part of the world. So I'm not sure for how far to go. I'll hand it over to you, Freya, if you want to introduce yourself, and you know the way we do it. You know how Aboriginal people do it.
And non-Aboriginal people in Australia do it too now.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, everybody does that.
Speaking by acknowledgement of country too. I'm speaking from Melbourne, which in the local Aboriginal language is Naam, and I'd like to acknowledge this country and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of this place, and to honour the elders of the Kulin Nation, past, present, and emerging, and to acknowledge, as Olivia did, all the non-human beings and elements that make up country and have and form the larger community here. So in terms of I'd also like to thank Olivia and Gabe for asking us to join you at the wonderful Carulas Centre, which I've been a fan of for many, many years, and following your fabulous work here. And I especially love that it's not just a program, an educational program, but a place, and a place that you care for, and you care for beings at this place. And I think that's such an important part of environmental work, that it not become just organizational and discursive and educational, but that each activist organ or organization is grounded in a particular place and forms a relationship with that place and learns from it and demonstrates what they are teaching through their relationship with that place. So I think that is very, very key and not necessarily widely understood in the environment movement. So just coming back to my arc, if I have an arc, doesn't always feel like an arc. It often feels caved in.
It can be a couple points.
I guess these days, sorry, I've got a bit of a throat this morning. These days, I really aspire to be an ecophilosopher. Have been grudgingly been an environmental philosopher, by which I mean an academic philosopher of the environment, working on environmental or ecological thought within an academic framework. That just arose really by necessity. I became a single parent and I needed to earn a living, and I had been following a philosophical path until then. I mean, studying philosophy because it was interesting and because it raised the really big questions, the big metaphysical questions that I personally was really interested in. They seemed to be what life was about. But then I had to become a professional academic in order to earn a living. And that was very, very far from what I had really aspired to be, which was more like just a writer, you know, exploring these issues outside of an institutional framework.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a 30-year detour where I practiced as an academic, teaching various kinds of philosophy, including environmental philosophy, in the academy. But then release came with early retirement, and then I could go back to just writing and aspiring to be what I'm calling an ecophilosopher, which to me means somebody who aspires to live the ecological life reflectively, just as far as it's possible, to live that life in this place and time, you know. And I'm very far from being a proper eco-philosopher at this point, but I am aspiring to it. And so.
That's great. Thanks for that, Freya. We've known each other for a long time, and spoken about a lot of these things over all this time. And Freya helped me when years ago, 30 years ago, I think. You helped me with that first old paper that I did about Aboriginal ideas, you know, philosophy, I suppose, you know, and I was very encouraged with that. But I was also really taken with when you and others talking about place, because for Aboriginal people it starts off with the idea of place. And briefly, everybody knows that old saying of Descartes, I think, therefore I am. If there was an Aboriginal equivalent, it'd be I am located, therefore I am. You know, so the whole meaning of life comes from a place of, you know, via mother and father, of course, of where you come from, where people emerge from, and so on. And so the whole of our lives, it's as you probably know, it's a really a society of great age. You know, they've traced it back to about 60, 70,000 years or something like that, older than that, but probably it looks like from the anthropological view, older than that, being not quite Homo sapiens yet. People are still developing, actually, literally, you know. So it goes way back to human migration and things like that, eventually coming into this country. And in the way we worked it out is that this land invented us, actually. It's the real inventor and creator. And you can also look at it from a, say, a scientific point of view. In a sense, it's like our ideas are saying, or have said, that the science view is actually right, even though we have all these fantastic stories, dreaming stories and all that. But they say, they don't say it, but the implication is there that the science version, how we came into being, is right. All that we did was sacralize that whole process. We made it sacred, actually. So there are stories exactly about how land creates us, you know. So I'd love to just tell one story. And you got to have permission to tell other people's stories here in this country with Aboriginal people. So I have permission. Plus, it is a public story anyway. You know, it's been written down, I think, in a collection of dreaming stories. So the whole world, the whole place was like a lunarscape, completely flat, no features and so on. So no hills, trees, anything else. But at some point, something awakens this dormant life. Life under the ground has been dormant for a long time. And wake up and emerge above the surface of the earth, this flat earth, a real flat earth, and they're larger than life. They're huge. So a kangaroo is as big as a 2-story building, and so on and so on. Everything is big. They start to engage with each other in very human-like ways. So they start engaging with each other, fighting, arguing, throwing rocks around at each other, which are now, of course, big boulders and so on, what you're looking at. But in their hands, they're just pebbles, you know. So they fight, they kill one another, they make love, you know, all kinds of activity. And all this ruckus wakes up this other dormant life that's still under the earth. And what they are, in the story, as the story goes, they are what do you call it? Proto-humans. They're not quite fully formed humans. They're still in a fetal stage. So they are woken by all this ruckus, crawl to the earth, to the surface themselves, and once they get there, these other beings, by now they're, in our terms, they're like ancestral beings, because everything, other life forms are all of our ancestors too. You know, they're all our, so ancestral spirits they are. And these ancestral spirits, some of them get together to help us proto-humans become fully formed human beings. So there's a whole description of how that happens. And it's wonderful, it is. It's so they straighten out their legs, help them to stand up, you know, steady them, work their limbs, exercise, clear their nose and mouth so they can breathe, straighten their back so they're standing upright. And they exercise them around the place, walking, learning how to walk and so on and so on. And then they teach them the rules or the laws, and they are called laws, L-A-W, L-O-R-E, they're combined, you know. And essentially they are the information about who they are, what they're doing there, where they are, and how they have to keep looking after the place. Essentially, the whole thing of almost like a, well, what we would call a dreaming of that place. It might be called something dreaming, you know. So they help them know all that, they learn all that, and they take their place. And then these beings return to where they emerged from, and they're still there today in our terms. Usually just gone back to sleep, basically, and occasionally getting woken up and disturbed by mining, by exploration, by, you know, activity, all this other activity that goes on forever, all the time. And so that's just the story in one area in the Central Desert area. I think their next door neighbours have a similar story, and sometimes they overlap, because the key thing for overlapping is flora and fauna, you know, other life forms. They might also be there in the next door neighbours, and that's how it is across the whole country. There's no such thing as empty land or nobody's land or wild land. Somebody is responsible for every square inch in the country. Well, that's because it's so old, you know, the society is so old. But the key thing is that the land makes us. There are no, there's no, in the old system, there's no godlike figure. There's no hierarchical figure of spirits or anything like that. So there's no heaven or hell, doesn't exist. There's no, you have to think about what that means for the kind of thinking that there is about life, you know. And of course, there's thousands of people who call themselves Christians now, and even some Aboriginal Muslims, you know, but they've taken up, but they're two different things. The dreaming isn't a religion. It's not a religion or an ideology or even a philosophy, unless it's a philosophy like a worldview. That's why I was saying, you know, I, for one, like the idea, the German word called Weltanschauung. I don't know if people are familiar with that. It means worldview, that's all, but in a very deeper level, not just worldview like my opinion or your opinion or something like that. So a worldview, but on a very deep level. So our worldview is that, yes, there's no hierarchy in the spiritual world, God at the top, and then angelic kind of spirits. But there are intermediary spirits, and they are flora and fauna. You know, they're which a whole lot of indigenous people have around the world. So there's things like green ant dreaming, but there's all kinds of things, eagles, you know, birds, animals, everything. They're intermediary kind of spirits because they're also spiritual ancestors, you see. We have our own ancestors. So no one, you don't actually have you don't need a faith. The dreaming has got nothing to do with faith. It's the reality of time and space and existence. A religion, though, as I said, the Aboriginal people who are Christians, is a different thing, which relies on faith. You don't need faith for the dreaming. You know, it's just real. Something just is. You know, that's it. It's reality. So you can be both. You know, with a dreaming and with a belief, or not, or no belief for that matter, or something like that. So it's just a very different system. It's not nature worshipping either, because out there underneath what we're walking on invented us. So what comes out of that is a relationalist idea of reciprocity, a reciprocal relationship. It has invented us. It looks after us. It still looks after us, you know, with, oxygen, but things like, of course, you know, resources, food and water and stuff like that. So we are now forever obliged to look after it. It looks after us, and we're obliged forever to keep an eye out for that. Don't damage it or exploit it or anything like that. So it's just very different, a way of looking at reality. I'll leave it there. For a lot more to it, but leave it there if you want to. I don't know.
Well,
you know, people ask questions, or Freya, if you want to take it up from there, you know.
Yeah. I think early on you said that the dreaming stories, the ancestor stories, kind of correlate with the scientific view.
It seems to be
evolution, the evolution of the universe, you know, the evolution of life, and so on. But I think that it contains more than science does.
Of course,
because it includes meaning and purpose and directedness within, if you like, matter itself. You know, within reality itself. The ancestor spirits are inherent in that early undifferentiated land. And we could presumably interpret land here in a very broad way as meaning something like cosmos, because it includes sea, sky.
That's right.
You know.
Sea, sky, stars.
So it's cosmos in a kind of non-specific sense. It doesn't necessarily mean like the Newtonian cosmos,
No.
cosmos of the physicists, but it includes that. So it's cosmos in some more immediate sense. And that cosmos is already imbued with life, purpose, meaning, in a word, law. And that cosmos is, so that goes beyond science, because science, even contemporary science, for all that has broken out of the Newtonian paradigm, it's still very materialist, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't allow that there is intrinsic mind or meaning in the cosmos at large. It allows that there is mind and meaning and purpose in perhaps all life forms. But when you look out into the universe, physics doesn't allow that there is intrinsic meaning out there. Whereas the metaphysic that you've just outlined, Mary, does imbue that that the basic nature of reality with meaning and purpose, or let's call it mind.
But doesn't can I just add something or question?
Different
What about David Bohm's work of the implicit and the explicit? In terms of the implicit, there is this in sort of inherent meaning of which is expressed in the explicit. Does that have any resonance? I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was something that I wanted.
Well, I love David Bohm. David Bohm was one of my earliest influences, but I think that my understanding of the implicate and the explicate order it's consistent with just a physicalist interpretation. And if that's not the case, then I think that's an interpretation, Bohm's interpretation of physics, that is already going beyond what standard physics is prepared.
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds a little bit like me, like having a bet each way, like betting on the horses. Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound like disrespectful, but somebody was I talking to you about this, Freya? I was talking with someone else about what the dreaming is. It's very hard to explain, and it does come into science. Do you know what I mean? Like multi-dimensional time we're talking about, actually. Anyway, I was talking with someone, and for me and many others, Stanner, the anthropologist, the old Australian anthropologist, he explains it. The way he explains it is quite often used. I use it myself because it's a sort of straightforward thing. And then I heard actually a German colleague of mine at the political science, that's where I am based up there in UQ mainly, and he explained it in a different way, of course, a German philosophical, quite, sort of heavy way. And I thought to myself, right, that's it. What he did was he explained what it is as opposed to what it's like Stanner does. Stanner explains the dreaming, very complex, what it's like. But this fellow, Martin, he explained it, what it is, and I got it. I got it straight away. I mean, I know the meaning, but it's very hard to explain. But how he explained it was more exacting. So I don't know if that's to do with the implicit and explicit. Do you know what I mean? You can recognize them. I recognize them as two different things, really, not vastly different, but alike in many ways. And that's just to do with language, a description of something. Is that the same thing?
Does that mean that it's that it's an informing the dreaming is an informing meaning? Perhaps it means that it's a meaning that you can only experience from within rather than representing it from without.
That's probably
you have to be an incarnation of that meaning in order to know that meaning. That once you step outside of the experience of it and try to represent it from outside, you can't actually know it.
That's right. Yeah.
To me, that is very. That seems a very central part of Aboriginal thinking that is like so different from Western thinking. That like the truth of this ontology or metaphysic, if you like, can't be known in a theoretical way or a representational way. You actually have to feel it. Feel it. You feel it from within. You feel it when you're in communication with country, you know?
Yes.
And you feel that as forces and as presences and as impulses that are arising from within you. You don't that's all not representable from outside,
No,
and it's
that's
not in any way theorizable. I mean, you
Mm.
can theorize that takes place, but you can't represent the experience theoretically. So there are two fundamentally different ways of knowing here. You know, the Western way of knowing is basically this Platonic way of knowing, of representing something in abstract form that you then, as the subject, you view that abstract representation within the theatre of your mind, you know, the theatre of your intellect, and it is at a remove from you, the subject, the knowing subject. Even though it's in your mind, it's like there's the subject, and then in the theatre of that subjectivity, there's a representation, an abstract representation, like a Platonic form or like a physical theory. And you, the subject, try to grasp reality by grasping that abstract representation.
I sort of. Sorry, go on.
And that, you know, that is to me, that is the origin of the subject-object divide.
Yes.
And dualism. Because it's a way of knowing that sets the knower outside of the universe, you know, outside of the world, outside of the world.
But that's right. When I heard Martin using particular phrase, I can't even remember it now, but it sounded instinctively. It was an instinctive thing for me. I recognise it. You know, when you suddenly recognise, that's it. You know, So I wasn't thinking it through. Do you know what I mean, or anything like that? I just instantly recognised it. You know, and many other examples. What do you call it? Examples of things like this happen. You know, when that happened, I was thinking about, of all things, literature, Tolstoy. If you've ever read War and Peace, and I know it sounds like a bullshit thing to say, isn't it? You know, you've read War and Peace. But when I first read it, I really did feel like it was a spiritual experience. Somebody on the radio, some literary professor, literature professor or something, was just happened to be talking about how it inspired him, and he described it. And the way he described it was like a spiritual experience. He said the words. He was wonderful at describing things. He said he felt like he was soaring in the air, floating or soaring in the air. It lifted him up and out of himself, like spiritual kind of. And I thought that's exactly how I felt when I first read that too. You know, so it's like you only know it if you something similar has happened to somebody else, or something similar has happened in another situation. You know, of something like that. I suppose I don't mean to start talking about language, but yeah, it's just very different. We've got a whole lot of different things here, partly because it's such an ancient place, you know, and we've never had to describe ourselves. See, not until we Europeans came here. You just lived. You lived what you know. So we were used to Europeans describing us, and then finally, you know, we start to describe ourselves, you know, and write novels and poetry and all that kind of stuff, and it's amazing, you know. Like we do have a different logic. We do have a logic, but real logicians probably would call it just, that's customs. You know, it's a custom. You know, it's nothing as deep as a logic or something. But of course, we're that old. We must have sorted out our thoughts at some time along the way. You know, but my another friend who gets in, he's a political science, more not so much a philosopher, but how he describes our being is it's like a long-term experiment in human order making. That's exactly what it is. And of course you could say that about all Indigenous people and all peoples, of course, but human order making, we just went about it a longer way without interruption. So there's a lot of things that have happened and have not happened here because of that great age, you know. but it's all interesting.
You know, do you know that book, Story About Feeling?
Oh yes,
by,
Bill Nietzsche. I always recommend that.
yes. Well, he details in that book the way you can only know the world through feeling.
Yeah, that's right. He virtually says that's what makes us human, feeling.
Yeah, the way that he knows his world, his cosmos, was through feeling. And he describes that feeling. I mean, he can't communicate it directly to the reader, but he does offer all kinds of insights into what it's like to experience the kind of feeling that he's talking about. It's not like an emotional feeling, is it?
No, it's not emotion.
Feeling. It's like it's a feeling to do with sensation and visceral experience, and there are emotional components to it too, because you can move. You can be moved by the feeling.
He says, "Hey, look at this tree."
Yeah, you can be spooked by the feeling. You feel something.
Fear too.
Like this huge presence, as if something terrible is about to happen. And he says, "You spooked, but you shouldn't be spooked, because just what does he call it? Like the big fella. Like it's just like what's that? The word for that force, that cosmic force, that creative force in Nietzsche's language." And he says, it's just, it likes you, it's coming close to you, and it's trying to be close to you, and you're going like this, because it is so powerful. It is like the primal force,
It's overwhelming. Yeah, it really is.
That's such a far cry from, the electron accelerators and the mega telescopes, and the way science looks at the world, and the way science understands the world. The science, it is always at such a remove, isn't it? Reality is completely removed from the subject, from the subject's body. It's just like, it's the eye and all the technology and then the intellect. It's not a holistic experience at all. And therefore, the reality that is known in that way is not reality under its holistic aspect. It's reality under some kind of partial aspect. And to my mind, science can never reveal reality under its holistic aspect because of the way of knowing. Science.
Yeah, the most disappointing
thing
for me.
Not that science is wrong. It's just that it's looking from a partial perspective. It can't include the existence or the experience of the knower themselves in its representation of reality. So, if you want a holistic understanding of reality, you can't rely on knowledge of that kind of theoretical knowledge that the whole Western civilization is built on. Going back to philosophy, actually, because philosophy in ancient times kind of invented that way of knowing.
It strikes me that they, I found or saw early on that they seem to veer away from anything to do with spiritual stuff, soul. They veer away from it because it's not just that. Well, they haven't had they're not tackling that, or it's out of their sphere or field of understanding, and so on and so on. They run. Well, I wouldn't say run away. I shouldn't say that, but they just turn their back on. Do you know what I mean? And of course, every culture in the world, every people in the world, it means something. It really does. It's a big thing. Even people who I've heard people say they're not religious, they don't even believe in God, but they do believe in some kind of spirituality. Do you know what I mean? So
Part of reality,
complete thing. It's a part of reality, yeah. So for science to ignore an important part of reality, you know, that might inform them about further ways, you know, of being and doing and thinking and that. Yeah. So,
sorry.
Yeah, no, go on. Well, I was going to go back to that idea of the land making us.
Yes.
And the reciprocal kind of the law of obligation, you'd call it. You could call it that, law of obligation, and how it's expressed is might differ from place to place, but there is this law of obligation. But more so that because it's made us, we've got to look after land there. But it's the other. Look at it from the other point though too, is that it's like you've got to yourself. And I know religion and all the other things do this too in a way, but you have to put yourself outside of yourself in a way, you know. It's when caring for something outside of yourself, you could even call it some kind of good Samaritanism, you know. You have to learn how to care about something outside of yourself, not just simply believe in a higher power or higher force. You can, that's your personal choice, you know, but as a collective of putting yourself outside of yourself and then looking after your environment. So I sometimes call our approach to things something like a what do you call it, a sacralized ecological collaborative stewardship system. We are or can be citizens, we can be all kinds of things under a general heading, but what we, I suppose what Aboriginal people would say, we are or should be custodians and stewards of land. And that settles a kind of stability on things across a whole population. You're looking after things, and it helps to make a stable society too. Do you know? Not a good society or peaceful. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking blackfellas, Aboriginal people. You'll hear me say blackfellas sometimes. That's what we call ourselves. We don't call other black people blackfellas. We call ourselves blackfellas. So we'll, you know, we just have this system of looking after, but it's nothing to do with looking for or searching or being abiding by a moral philosophy. It's nothing to do with a moral philosophy or being good or being rewarded in heaven, because there isn't any heaven, you know. You're not being rewarded for it. What it is, it's rational, stable behavior, how to have a stable society for a long time. You know, that's really what it's about. And that's good for not only the descendants, you know, you have to have a stable kind of system for that. So looking after, you have an idea of it. But further than that, and this is what I would, I was thinking of talking to a psychologist. I don't know if there's such a thing as a philosophy of psychology, do you know? But I was going to talk more with you about that when we get to talk more, Freya, is how outside of this kind of custodianship, how do you build, but outside of religion and that, how do you build a society or a people with a conscience? Because some of the terrible things that have happened in history, I'm not just talking about Second World War and atom bomb and, you know, gas chambers and horrible, but all, you know, a whole lot of cruel wars, really terrible things have happened, as if people have no conscience. And of course, I know, you know, fascism, that's a kind of a complete absence of a conscience, and a singular individual thing is, I guess, people like serial killers. I suppose, you know, they've left their conscience outside behind somehow. So how can that be built without just simply relying on a belief system? Because a belief system can be overturned or, you know, gotten rid of, and because people change their mind. But doing a reciprocal custodial thing, it does become a habit. It becomes a habit, and so, you know, and it still doesn't make for good people or anything like that. There are still bad things happening. We weren't a peaceful mob. We had battles. It's all there in the dreaming stories too. But one thing we didn't do, and it's pretty, they've studied this through. You can study it through the stories, many stories, but also the actual act of there's hundreds of places they've stayed in for years and years, like we're talking about thousands of years. So there's no history or habit of what do you call it? Wars of conquest, wars of conquest. Taking over anybody else's land. That is a huge no-no. That's against the law. But you can have a big fight. You can have as many fights as you like, because it's just human. It's just a natural human thing to do. But taking over somebody else's land, this is why land is seen as a sacred thing. You see, you can't take over other people's land. So how do you build a conscience? You were talking about consciousness.
Well, you've answered the question, haven't you? I mean, you build a conscience, and if we still call it a conscience.
Do you build it, though? Yeah. Do you build it?
Well,
construct it?
Don't you discover law? You discover law by being in intimate relationship with land, which means caring for land, but also living from land.
Living on it, yeah.
On the land, and you do that reciprocally, so that your activities within the landscape, your means of making your livelihood within the landscape, reciprocally feed back into benefits and affordances for other species.
And generation after generation. Yeah.
Yeah. So you, in the process of cultivating that kind of relationship with land, you discover law, L-A-W, and the nature of law is ultimately, according to your account and other people's account of Aboriginal thought, is to care for the land, which is something which is larger than you but includes you. And you discover that in a visceral way, which is non-negotiable. It's not like
it's non-negotiable.
logical inference. It's not like, it's not like Western morality or even the morality from other cultures around the world, which base morality on some kind of moral reason that, other people and other beings are sentient centers of life and purpose, just like you. So therefore they are entitled to what you're entitled to. This is the golden rule. They are all entitled to whatever you're entitled to. But that's moral reasoning, and that's negotiable. Like, you're not bound by that. You can just decide to be irrational. Or you can say, well, yes, they are logically perhaps as entitled to what I'm entitled to, but really there's a deeper level in which I'm much more responsible for my own welfare than I am for the welfare of others, because I am myself, I have to, I'm the only one who can eat for me. I'm the only one who can drink for me and scratch myself when I'm itching. And, there are a whole lot of things that only I can do for me. So I'm in a special relationship to myself. I'm not in that relationship to everybody. So morality is a fragile thing. Morality in the way that the West has construed it is a fragile thing because it's not actually logically complex. I mean, that's the primordial question of moral philosophy. Why be moral? Like, if somebody just says, well, I don't feel empathy for other beings, I'm sorry, I just don't feel that. Yes, that's a good argument, but really the argument from my own needs having a greater call on me than the needs of others, that's also a powerful argument. Therefore, I'm not going to be moral. I mean, morality is fragile. Morality is not well grounded in Western thought.
No, no.
Whereas
And
law,
that's why the law is different for Aboriginal
yeah, the
people.
law is different because
Very
the law
different
is
from
not,
Western law. I mean,
it's not a
Mm.
based on an inference, a logical inference, an argument, like you should treat others the way that you want to treat yourself. It's actually something that, as you say, Mary, you learn in the process of caring for country. You know, you learn this in a visceral way, like Bill Nietzsche, and experiencing
Bill
the
Nietzsche.
forces within country, the presences, the intelligence within country. You learn this, and you realize that you are actually, it's larger than you, but you're a part of it, and therefore this is your law. This law is the inmost truth about you. Therefore, it's not negotiable. It's like realize
And what?
myself,
Yeah.
realize
Yes.
the, to contribute to the self-realization of this greater whole of which I'm part. So I think that is the, that is an Indigenous type answer to the question that you raised.
Yeah, no, it is, and what helps is also having a. Sorry, you're freezing. You're freezing up. Freya is freezing up. You're right. Well, I was gonna say you're probably hearing it anyway. But the other couple of other things like having our own logic, and the idea that comes from this relationalism, which starts with land, and then it evolves further. And what are some of the attributes of this this kind of relationalism? There's relationalism, and then there's a relationalist ethos, and there's survivalism, and then there's a survivalist ethos too, and they are entangled. They're entangled with each other, So the attributes of this relationalism is autonomy, and it's a funny kind of autonomy. It's not the autonomy there where you become a law unto yourself. Absolutely not. You can't. Well, you can have a go, but it won't be very comfortable for you. But it's a contradictory thing in a way, because the way you're supposed to carry it out is by autonomous regard. So you recognize yourself as your autonomous being, definitely, but the other people are autonomous also. They're their own boss, and women are definitely autonomous beings. They are their own boss. Nobody owns them. They can't be bought and sold, anything like that. They're not just baby factories, just useful for having children, bearing children. So they have, the contradictory part of it is that you're autonomous, but you have to seek relationalist ethos. You are seeking relationalist ethos, even though you're autonomous, the other one is balance. The governance system is a gender balance, but I know other Indigenous peoples around the world. I know our Native American friends have told me different ideas about that too. Women have to get permission from men, and women have to give permission about various actions and so on. So gender balance, yes. But the other interesting one is to do with authority and power. How it worked out in the very beginning for all cultures around the world, ancient ones and modern ones though too, is in order to have, in that view, in order to have stability, a settled, ordered society, you have to join authority and power. So you have a hierarchy, of course, with a powerful group, family, a religious order, a military order like the Spartans or something, pharaohs, emperors, royal families, and so on, everything up the top. They have guards, an army who protect them. They're not protecting everybody, they're protecting them, sometimes against everybody that comes below, and so on. So a hierarchy. But what Aboriginal people decided to do was to separate power and authority. They separated them. I don't know any other culture that has done that, have it, they're on the same level, but they're steady, they're always, and not too far away. But you have particular people, knowledgeable people in our terms. They're usually older people, but not only exclusively white and grey-haired people. It can be young people, very smart, on the ball young people, and it's like an ancient succession planning system. So you've got to have younger people, very knowledgeable, and especially ones that are seeking knowledge. They're seeking it, and they're watching, and they're observing, and they can be like elders actually too, And so if somebody wants to grow old and never grow up, that's all right. A lot of 50-year-old teenagers around, so that's all right. That's the autonomy. You see, you can be who you want or what you want, and so on. So balance. And power. Power is always in the hands of the people. An old saying about power to the people, which is what democracy is supposed to be about, apparently. So I read, the people are supposed to have at least some power, not just a voting power, but to be looked after, and so on. So I have to say that Aboriginal people are not democratic. They're not. They have authority of these sort of people, and power is always held in the hands of the people. So if the people don't like this particular legislation, they'll say no to elder people. I've seen it happen quite a lot. So older, knowledgeable people, the elders, they actually ask permission. They might say, well, we are considering this, or something. And all the people can say, well, it sounds okay, but I don't think I'll go for that. Won't go for that. So they work it out, in that way, but no hierarchy. So absent a hierarchy, anything like that. The other one is place, is exactly what I was saying before. Not I think, therefore I am, but I am located, therefore I am. And the last one is ethics, of course. And the ethics, they're not ethics as such. They're not called ethics. They're called the law. What you would think of as ethics is actually the law. LAW, but LORE too. That's the story of how come we have this idea. Do you know what I mean? How it happened, and so how it developed, and where it came from, and what does it mean? That's the LORE. But the LAW is not just the rules, but the meaning of these rules, and so on. And of course, all older people across cultures, they know a lot. You know what I mean? How things happened in the history, and why things happened like this, and they've experienced great many things, much more than younger people, so on and so on. So it is very much a different system. And the logic is definitely not Aristotelian logic, with the three rules. I excluded middle, a schoolyard kind of, what's the name? You're either my friend or you're not. You're my enemy, or something like that. And the other two laws, I think it's the law of identity and the law of
Non-contradiction.
Non-contradiction. That's right. So all Aboriginal people are drunk and violent. That's a pretty regular one that you read about in the newspapers, but it could be anything. All Muslims are violent terrorists. All car salesmen are dodgy. You can say it about anyone. It's a wonderful logic for propaganda. It's perfect for propaganda. And that's what you read and hear in the news about, Somebody or other is being demonized. That's propaganda as soon as you start hearing that kind of thing. And the other one is the if-then rule. If something or other, then therefore something or other, something or other. Those logics are definitely not Aboriginal logics. They're I was interested for a while in Chinese logic, what I understand about it, what little I understand, but the only way I could understand it, because there's stuff written about it, I don't know if it's all of Asian logic, I'm not quite sure, but that yin and yang symbol, it's got a curved line. And to me, that told me straight off, it's a flexible line between two or more views. It's quite flexible. Whereas the Western one, logic, is a sharp line. It's a straight out sharp line. Either or. You have to have certainty, not uncertainty. But the rest of the world knows it's full of uncertainty. The world is full of uncertainty, you know. So you have to be flexible about this. So what they accept into their logic is things like paradoxes, contradictions, ambivalence, ambiguity, all the uncertain stuff. You've got to take it into account. You just simply got to take it into account to fully understand things. So the Aboriginal logic is closer to that than it is to the Western one. You know, sometimes it's useful. Like, for example, it's not, I'm not saying it's wrong or anything like that, the Western logic. For example, you know, I'm like everybody else. I like cop shows, you know, watch all of them. And you hear about it, you know, what do they call those forensic people? They've got to prove that the person there with a knife wound in its back is actually John Smith. So they have to do all this really detailed exploration research into this until they're absolutely positive. Yes, either they have to examine either this is John Smith or not. Do you know what I mean? So either or is right in certain circumstances, but you can't use it for politics or, you know, in other social ways. But exact examination things, yes, it's a correct thing, you know. So the Aboriginal one is it's to do with if you ever see, or you can see it on Google, the Aboriginal language map. It's called a language map, but actually it's a governance map. That's what it is, really, when you really look at it. It's made up by a white fellow, a white anthropologist, Tyndale, I think, Tyndale from Adelaide. He actually wrote it out, because we never did maps like that in at all. They have maps in their head. Aboriginal people, traditionally, you know, they just have that. But it's true. Every square inch of the country is somebody's place. So there are hundreds and hundreds. Nobody really fully knows how many. They're doing that kind of research now to this day. They're doing that. But anyway, so it's like this. There are hundreds of places, multiple places. Every group has its own dreaming story. It's Genesis. You can say Genesis, you know, Genesis. There's not one big country with one Genesis. There are hundreds of Genesises for all these different places, or creative drama, you can call it. But for some reason, I don't know myself, I never discovered why they picked the word, why they like the word dreaming, Aboriginal people, you know. So hundreds of those, and a dreaming is the law for that country, LAWLORE. So there are hundreds of those too, and some of them overlap, because the same flora and fauna are in the next door neighbours, you know, dreaming stories. See? So sometimes the law, LAW, overlaps. And the law is the truth for that country, for that region, place, you know, hundreds of places. So hundreds of truths, not one truth for the whole country. No, what's that word? Absolute. No absolutism in Aboriginal thinking, see, you know, so no absolute truth. And a truth is a perspective of the whole of existence from one particular place, but there are hundreds of places. And the outcome, the equation or outcome of this logical outcome is that all perspectives are valid and reasonable. They're not necessarily right, you know, but they're right for those people, but they're not right for everybody else. But it is, they're valid and reasonable. They're valid for those people, and they're reasonable for those people, even if they're crazy. They're crazy, like what's the name? Like what was it? Fascism. You know, if one group is, you know, very fond of fascism somehow, well, their neighbours mightn't be. You know, and that's and they might choose. But you can't even rely on choice, really, because they might be persuaded that way, which is, you know, what has happened sometimes in history and that with, what's the name, with fascism. But because you've also had this other idea, inbuilt kind of values, if you like, or laws of law of obligation, of custodianship, stewardship, that is like a counter to any mad idea that one group might have. You have to look after things, and if others see that that's got nothing to do with the law of obligation, fascism, it counters it. Do you know what I mean? It's like relationalism counters survivalist ethos. The survivalist ethos can, if you take it to its nth degree, it can turn into fascism. That's, and I learned that from my from what's her name, Hannah, what's her name, Hannah, German philosopher,
Hannah Arendt.
Arendt, yeah, that's it,
Arendt.
Hannah Arendt, and her idea of having the wrong thinking, because it's funny. It's exactly what my old father said. He was talking about, or I was talking about, why did they treat us really badly? All the colonialists, massacres, probably like in other countries that had been colonized, murders, massacres everywhere, and so on. That's happened here. Anyway, I was asking him about that, and he didn't answer for a while, because some people would say back, oh, they're horrible, hate-filled bastards who want to kill blackfellas, and so. But what he said was, they didn't know what they were doing. He said, no. I thought to myself, being a young know-it-all person, what do you mean? Of course they're trying to get rid of us. That's what they know very well what they're doing. But I never understood. Well, they don't know who they are. They don't know what they're doing because they don't know who they are. These are people who've been dumped there by the English, and so on, and terrible things happening.
That's
but
the
I never.
Same thing and the Christian. I'm not a Bible reader, but forgive them because they do not know.
Yeah. Well, a bit like that.
Can step in, but something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And I never understood that kind of thing of these are people who don't know what they're doing. I learn't that from Hannah Arendt, because when she spoke about the wrong thinking, you know what I mean? It comes from this kind of, it's nothing to do with like being rational. They were rational and logical, but they actually still didn't know how to think. And people who do those sort of things don't know how to think. They're it's not they're mad. They're, but anyway, I learnt that from there. So
Mary,
I thought. So the relationalist thing counters the survivalist ethos. Do you know what I mean? So that's why that kind of thinking couldn't. It just didn't happen here. It didn't arise. Above all, it's not in the stories, but there were stories of people having fights. Yeah, that kind of thing, but not taking over land. Yeah, sorry.
Talking about.
You were getting frozen before.
Talking about different perspectives being equally valid. You with a group of colleagues at University of Queensland have proposed this or launched this project for an Australian philosophy, which, as I understand it, is to be based on the template of an Aboriginal Dalton Shang.
Not completely, but
it's also
the idea of how important that is. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. To use that, the basic insights of Aboriginal thought as a framework or a foundation for arriving at a uniquely Australian kind of philosophy, but in collaboration with Western philosophy and perhaps other philosophies that are current in Australia today. Can you say, for people here, perhaps, can you say something about why you think an Australian philosophy is important? I've said what I understand it would consist in, but
Mm.
why is that important as opposed to, a universal philosophy, a philosophy that everybody can kind of participate in? Because it involves collaboration across sometimes conflicting perspectives, doesn't it?
That's absolutely right.
Philosophy, a collaborative Australian philosophy
Yeah.
needs to take into account these different, but not only different, but sometimes conflicting perspectives. So perhaps I'm mindful that time is moving on and we wanted to leave a bit of time for questions, but maybe we could finish talking with a little wrap up of like this idea of Australian philosophy and whether that implies that each country should have a country in the, the kind of national sense. Each nation or region should have its own philosophy.
Yeah.
Maybe just say a little bit about project.
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's necessary. At this stage, the old-fashioned idea of philosophy or philosophy making or knowledge building and all that would ordinarily take, centuries or millennia. It'll take a long time. But things are getting pretty hot now around the world. Climate change, possibility of a third world war, pandemics, and it's all like the gathering of perfect storms all together, several perfect storms all gathering together kind of thing. So it's kind of necessary. And because partly, usually a country that like America, like here, it'll take a while for its very own philosophies to arise. And I know there's several philosophies like pragmatism, John Dewey and ones like him, and there'd be part of that here too, of course, pragmatism, but a deeper kind of idea of its relationship with the land itself. They have to work that out because that's the beginning of it. It's not like, for example, the word, the Philosophy for Children conference that happened a while ago now. The idea of teaching kids, it wouldn't be talking so much about why, which is how it usually starts off with the word why. For Aboriginal people, the locality would be the most important thing. It would precede, locality precedes why. Do you know? So where you are, especially via mother and father, or if we're talking about school kids, children, schools, where that is or something. But it's their environment, their surroundings and so on, fully understanding that. So an Australian philosophy would have to start with that. And then, of course, that idea of, everybody knows what multipolarity is. Well, I in a recent conference, I collaborated with a friend of mine on politics, political science, especially for foreign policy, and put forward the idea of multipolarity, which I say we invented, which is a bit of a cheek, I suppose. But in a way, it's a bit like that. There's hundreds of places, you see, hundreds and hundreds of places. And so it's multipolarity in one country. That's actually what it is. All perspectives are valid and reasonable. There's nowhere else to discover in the world. The world is crowded now. Everybody knows where all these different places are. So the most stable approach to it is to try to get on with each other. And the most stable way of getting on with each other is to have a go at looking after land as a practical thing, because, like, to me, like ethics is a doing thing. It can be a great high principle up there, and so on. Yes, we'll all, love one another and join hands and all that kind of stuff. But that's too difficult. In an Aboriginal sensibility, that would be that's simply too hard, because we won't stay peaceful for long. We'll start fighting. And if we don't fight about something, we'd invent it, do you know? So you have to have some other activity that teaches you outside of yourself, like a law of obligation. You're obliged to look after the place, you know? So the kind of autonomy we're talking about too is that you have to have this autonomous regard even for people who you don't like or who don't like you. You know, you have to treat them as if they're full on, completely reflectively human beings who deserve, you know, to be treated, or who don't deserve to be treated with without a conscience. It stops you from going beyond, from getting rid of your conscience. You keep it. You have to keep it, and still keep thinking of people that you don't like. They're humans, and the main thing is that you have to know what their interests are. So you mightn't like them, but you have to know what their interests are, and not just for like spying kind of thing. But you have to know what is it that they're worried about, and they're thinking, in Aboriginal terms, they're thinking the same, or want to know the same about you. You see, and it's nothing to do with a moral philosophy. Again, it's all practical. It is our form of pragmatism, I suppose. So
Mary,
the aim is stability. Sorry, I was just going to go on to just finish this part. Is that there's an idea in this IR, international relations, is that security is the most important thing. It is more important than absolutely anything else. But the way you get to security is stability. So you have a society, population that is stabilized and is stable, and activities that are stabilizing, and then you're on the path to security. Do you know what I mean? It's not the other way around. Look for security first, and then you'll get stability. It doesn't work. It's never worked like that. Even the Treaty of, not Treaty of Versailles, Treaty of Westphalia. They tried to bring peace between all those warring nations back then, 1500s or 1600s or something, and it didn't really work. They tried to make it work, all the Europeans fighting with each other, but it sort of worked. A good idea, about what's that word? The country's own. We use it sometimes too. I can't think of it. Your own. No, I can't think of it. But anyway, the rule that came out of that treaty was that you don't go around attacking and taking over other people's country. But it only lasted for a little while, and then they went back to warring. Europe, and I'm not trying to point out or pinpoint Europeans. This all happened in every other country too, basically. And the history of, and we didn't even get to talk about Taoism. Hey, oh God. But they had the Warring States period, which lasted for 400 years. Talk about 30-year war and 100-year war. They had it for about 400 years until finally some really tough guy came along, killed a few million people, and then it united the whole country. And that's why it's called China, apparently. There's a movie about it, terrific movie. So it's other countries too, but so yeah, stability first, and then security. Sorry, Freya, you're frozen again. Anyone want to ask questions, or sorry?
We do have some questions in the chat, but I'll give. It looks like
just one last question.
There we go.
About Australia.
Oh, there you are. Yes, good.
Do you think that means that? Oh, really? Am I?
Yeah.
Oh no!
Oh no! Now she's gone. Oh no, Freya.
She disappeared. Well, we'll give her a minute to hopefully rejoin. Oh, there she is.
Oh, good. Look, I should say that I've got to go on another Zoom at 12 to myself. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, do the time conversion for me quickly. 12 is how long for you?
Oh, for how long? It's about another 20 minutes.
Okay,
it'll be 12 midday here.
Sure thing.
Sorry about that.
No problem. We'll give Freya a second to
Yes.
add any final thoughts or questions, and then we have just a couple questions in the chat, and we can wrap up.
It's
am I back?
yes.
Am I back?
Yes.
Am I alive again?
We can hear you. You can't see you. That's all, but we can hear you. There you are. There you are.
Okay, you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, love.
Oh,
Yeah.
you can't see me. Oh, okay.
No, I can see. We can see you.
Well, what I was going to ask was like a radical question for philosophy. I mean, this whole process of, for me, you know, the progress towards becoming an eco-philosopher is actually the deconstruction of philosophy itself, because philosophy is this highly theoretical way of knowing, which I'm becoming increasingly disillusioned with and seeing as quite distorting of the nature of things. But would it mean, I mean, would an Australian philosophy, taking on board all the kinds of things that you've been saying, Mary, would that mean that it would have to be primarily a practice? You know, a set of practices.
Oh yeah, doing.
Like,
well, like ethics.
It would need to include practices that help the country. It would need to include ceremonies whereby you communicate with the, you know, with the world around you, that like communicate with country through ceremony, through dance and ritual and song, and
well, it could mean those things.
The poetic,
the key
poetic
the key things
you and the place that you're in. So that philosophy itself becomes deconstructed from this purely discursive theoretical activity into a much more embodied activity.
Yeah, the Australian view. That's right. Yeah,
that would
more or less.
That is good result.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
The key things and everything would follow from this. Hopefully, the key things are the land and what was I going to say? Energy. There's something else, but doing things, a locality, you know, the locality. So Australian philosophy wouldn't be one big block thing, you know, like well, they aren't in other countries, you know, French philosophy, German, and so on. They're not big blocks; they're different. Well, it would be the same here. So people who live here, white people, I mean, Australians who live in way out in the dry centre, you know, or way up north in the tropical kind of areas, they would have their own view. You see, their perspective, their place. So it would emerge from place and environment. You know, so Australian philosophy would be a big mixture of a whole lot of things, but the key underlying foundational thing would be place and environment. Look after environment and understand the place is sort of got to be within you. Do you know? But don't worship it. Don't worship anything. In fact, don't bow down to anything or anyone. Nothing. You have to be an autonomous person. You know, but that doesn't mean being, you know, selfish and tell other people off, you're wrong, you know, and all this sort of stuff. But looking after, you know, law of obligation, you're obliged. And that's the only thing I have to say, the only way I can describe from my perspective, this is I don't know about other Aboriginal people actually, but I see it as a bus. It's a bit like a bus. It's all bright and shiny in the front. And people have the best seats in the front, you know. But as people enter into this bus, they go further down the aisle, you know. And when they get to the middle part, the good caring kind of starts to ease off. And by the time you get to the end of the bus, there is no wall. There is no back of the bus because a whole lot of people are falling out of this bus called democracy. Nobody cares about people who really need care, you know. And to me, that's a proper bus is the one that has a closed back, you know, and open windows or air conditioning or, good care. To me, that's a good democracy. But I don't see it. Not even in this country. They're starting to close off, for the healthcare, the helpful caring things about looking after elderly people. The whole thing of aged care is a mess. Looking after disabled people is a mess. Women on their own, families, struggling, Hey.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be in a real democracy. It shouldn't be. It should have an underpinning foundation of the law of obligation. We're obliged to look after everybody, not just the rich and the powerful. And I know a lot of Americans, a lot of people who live in democracies know this too, which is why they're rioting all over the place probably too and protesting.
Yeah. Olivia, should we?
Still 15 minutes to go for me. Yeah. I was saying I've got to go early for long.
Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We do have quite a few questions in the chat, so we'll get through as many of them as we can. The first question is from Pam. She said, Freya, you spoke about when you're in relationship with land, living in it, you come to know law, being how to take care of others more than human and non-human. Can you illustrate your experience of that as a non-Aboriginal person?
Yes.
How you came to know law from living this way?
Your land, that land, eh?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't claim to know law. I'm still taking baby steps towards that. But I think at this point, I'm starting to understand what knowing law might be. And from talking with Mary, reading Mary's stuff and reading a lot of other Aboriginal authored stuff that's been coming out over the last 10 years. And also from my own experience. There have been a couple of really important experiences that I've had kind of on country. Country is this Aboriginal English word meaning a place, but a place that's animated with meaning and life of its own, and is it can be happy and sad. It wants its people. It's like it's a protagonist. It's a presence. It's not. It's often written with a capital C, and it's becoming indispensable as a word in Australia because it's far more expressive than just the old word land, isn't it, Mary? Country it's a new metaphysical concept for non-Aboriginal Australia, but it's gaining currency here because people are starting to understand this concept and starting to experience it, maybe in small ways, but I have spent time in a very remote part of Australia, on my own for many weeks, and I did experience things incredible things there that were very spooky in Bill Nidji's terms. They were very powerful and transforming kinds of. I never talk about them. I never describe them, but they did happen, and so that was enough for me. I had that visceral kind of knowing about something through those experiences. But then actually, as a result of that kind of pilgrimage, I suppose, I looked for a place that was like the place where I was camped for a long time, which was granite country. I looked for over in Western Australia, and I looked for a place in Victoria on the southeast coast of Australia where I normally live. I looked for some granite country where I could become an inhabitant, a re-inhabitant of that kind of country where I had those experiences. That took a long time. To be in a position to both find it and to have the resources to, be be in a position to care for it. And so about 10 years later, I did find a place, a granite outcrop, and started the work of caring for country in earnest there.
Why is it happening?
Looks like you're breaking up a bit again, Freya. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you can
freezing,
hear us.
frozen.
Of my life, I still have conservation with some other people. Since it hasn't been.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear us?
I don't know. I don't know what's happening here. I mean, I'm in Melbourne. It shouldn't be dropping it off.
No.
Well, I think
But anyway.
yeah.
Anyway. Okay.
Okay.
Right, she's frozen again. Oh.
That's okay. We'll give see what
so
happens.
the experience. Oh, okay. Well.
Oh, Freya, you're just coming in and out. We'll give that just a second, and Mary, before we wrap up, Kat Brown is wondering, could it be that revelationists are transformed into survivalists when afflicted and suffering? And of course, survivalists turn into relationists, then as caregivers of our country ecology, depending on where we are on the relational survival spectrum, can this determine our ethos?
Spot on. You got it. Yes, if somebody's been through terror, I always put it in the crisis is either small, could be small scale. You got to be careful. Survivalism. You got to be careful going out, crossing the road. You might get hit by a bus, of course. Why you go by the rules. Your father or somebody has been working at a place for 30 years and they get sacked. All because the very young executive wants to be paid more, and of course the struggle starts. He struggles. The person who's sacked after all those years. So large scale though is a war, refugees, all that sort of stuff. People who are struggling or fleeing, and so on and so on. But the real point about it is what kind of frame of mind do they end up with out of these crises? What frame of mind? Some people are pretty tough, pretty resilient. They cope, they work things out, they survive, and they really do survive. Partly because relationalism is around about them. They got support and so on. But other people, whether they got support or not, end up with a very, very hard-nosed attitude. The whole of life is a bloody. It's a dog-eat-dog world. I've got to watch myself. I've got to protect myself first. Me and my family come first before anybody else. You're climbing a ladder of, more and more success or money or whatever to protect yourself. That's a survivalist ethos. That's a survivalist ethos. So you can have survivalism, and the impact on people's thinking, mind frame, is either a hardness, or a gratitude almost, because they've got through it, they've coped and so on. That's all it is, really. So relationalism counters survivalist ethos tendencies, and that comes from having this law of obligation all the time as built in from your child. You've got to look after this, but not just look after the land. That's the first thing. But then that's the template for, look after uncle and aunt and grandfather, and, have obligations to your relatives. Doesn't matter whether you're arguing with them and you don't like them. You still have obligations, actually. That doesn't stop it.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Well, this has been incredible, Freya and Mary. Thank you so much for joining us and taking all this time and across time zones in the world to share your time with us.
Yes.
It's been incredible.
Yes.
Incredible to chat with you.
Okay, thank you.
Taking a brief hiatus next week before we begin our next series, Veganism at the Crossroads of Human Identity and Cultural Change, on Friday, June 16th. Our first guest will be Dr. Chris Miller, co-founder and vice president of academic affairs at Arihanta Institute, whose current research focuses on engaged Jainism and the ways by which Jain principles are lived in daily life, as well as transnational yoga's entanglements with other cultures around the world. As always, if you feel called to support Kurulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link in our bio, kurulos.org. But thank you to Freya, Mary, our whole audience, everybody. It's been wonderful to chat with you all and spend this time together.
Thank you
Yes.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.
More anon.
Yes. Good one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Mary.
Bye, love.